This is Angelo John Lewis for the Sacred Inclusion Network. And this is in advance of our Spirituality and Social Justice Symposium. And I'm here with one of the participants, Shariff Abdullah of the Common Way organization, Common Way. And you have probably, maybe you know about Shariff, maybe you don't, but let me tell you a couple of things. Shariff has been involved with social justice in a holistic manner and in a conventional manner for over 30 years. He started out in Camden, New Jersey, where he did a bunch of laudable work. And for the last, I would say, almost a decade, he's been the director of the Common Way Institute. Shariff has also visited over 43 countries and over 120 distinct cultures. And he has a unique vision which spans culture and class. And we're going to talk about this, but at one point he was involved in pretty much conventional, I'll call it social justice work. And then that decided that that was not enough. He needed to take a different path. Shariff, welcome again to the podcast.
Oh, good to be here. And thank you for inviting me again.
You know, I started asking you this, I started mentioning this, but I want to ask you again. When I look at your resume, you were following a fairly conventional social justice path. You're involved in a lot of things, everything from public housing to demonstrations and this, that, and the other thing. And you were a lawyer also. And then you decided something was missing. And I'm wondering, what was that missing thing and why did you just try to change your approach?
Well, I'm not sure it's as much missing as integrated. And the people who are dealing with public housing, well, with housing issues, focus on housing. People are focused on poverty, focus in on poverty. And when you start pulling out from that view, you start seeing that there's an awful lot of overlap. And a lot of times with the problem, the thing that looks like the problem, the thing that looks like the solution, just becomes another aspect of the problem when you pull out. And so what I started looking at, and again, Camden was very, very instructive for me. We were doing some really, really great stuff in Camden. In terms of economic development, the organization that I helped to found, the Black People's Unity Movement, had 100 units of housing, 2 daycare centers, a supermarket, a gas station. I mean, we're trying to like build our own mini town, and we were successful. We had a sewing factory where we at its heyday, we had 40 people sewing full time. As a teenager, I had hired my mother. Okay, so this is really cool stuff going on. But at the same time, most of us were alcoholic. Many of us were on drugs. Many of us were violent in our lives, in our domestic lives, our family lives. Many of us had what I call in one of my books, spiritual starvation. People who act like that are spiritually starved, and it plays out in society. And so a lot of us were exhibiting the behavior that we were condemning white people for. And so I started asking the question, there's something wrong with this picture. Let's talk about that. And that is a conversation I could not get. I mean, people were not ready. Everybody wants to examine their enemy. No one wants to examine themselves. And because you're not examining yourself, you actually become your own enemy. And people were not ready, not willing to hear that. Many still are not. People were not willing to do the examination that says, maybe there isn't an enemy, maybe there's just us, and maybe we need to stop acting in a particular way. so that was the beginning of, I always had a spiritual core, but I didn't know how to manifest it. I didn't know how to deepen it. There was no tradition in in Camden, New Jersey, for the deepening of spiritual awareness. Um, Somebody, and I cannot find who's made this quote. Maybe somebody listening to this will know it, and I need to because it's such a great quote. Somebody said that drugs and alcohol are the spiritual experiences, the mystical experiences of the ignorant.
Mhm.
And I know when I was alcoholic and I know when I was drug addicted that what I was looking for was that transcendent experience. I didn't know where to find it. Um, and I can tell you that learning how to meditate and learning how to contemplate my reality is a whole lot cheaper and a whole lot better for your stomach than Tiger Rose or Ripple or any of the other medications of choice.
Yeah, it's quite a step to go from them versus us to the problem is us.
Mhm.
That's a big step.
Yeah, yeah, and I took it in steps. Okay, so um, if I had written my main book when I was 14 or 15, the title would have been Creating a World That Works for All Black People, because I knew all white people were fine.
Mm.
You know, I mean, I could see on TV Ozzy and Harriet are having a ball. I had no experience of them of white people having problems. And when I went to college, I saw a documentary on Appalachia, and I went, "Whoa!" So I started changing my perspective from black people to black people and poor white people. And then I start realizing, wait a minute, some of these folks who look middle class are really, they've got problems, they've got a different set of problems. Now, if I don't respect their problems, then, to hell with them. But if I want someone to respect my problems, I'm going to have to start looking at how they handle and exhibit their own problems. So over the course of my 4 years at Clark University up in Massachusetts, I started expanding this notion, and right around that time, there were all of the other movements coming about, the women's movement, the American Indian movement, and I kept saying, what do they have to complain about? Yeah, what do they have to complain? It's like, whoa, you are missing a huge part of their history, but you're missing a huge part of your own history. You know, I mean, when I don't know anything that happens with women over time, then I'm missing my own history. Okay, and so I started. It's not even a matter of searching for it. It's a matter of just paying attention. Because once you pay attention, you start seeing all the things that are going on.
Another thing that was happening historically about those times, you mentioned the American Indian movement, the sort of the rise of women. There was a profusion of spiritual activity in the United
Mm-hmm.
States, stuff coming from the East,
Yep.
stuff from Native American spirituality. So, we're about the same age, so you had to be hearing some of these things too.
Yep. And um, not knowing how to integrate them. So for a long time, there were these spiritual threads that were like weaving their way through my life. Buddhism, some of the Hindu philosophies, etc. And I read the books. I try my best to figure out how do you meditate, or how do you do yoga or whatever. And then you get up and you walk out the door, and none of that stuff is being supported out there. And so so there's this disconnect, and in some ways there really still is the disconnect. I will talk about consciousness, and in a lot of the consciousness, I don't want to say communities, but the areas where people talk about consciousness, there ain't many Black people, and they're and it's like, well, welcome, Shariff, but what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be talking about those issues like homelessness and police brutality, and those are your issues over there? I'll give you a quick story. And I am not going to name any names. People in Portland can figure out who I'm talking about. So one of the mayors of Portland was not only a friend, but a thought leader that I had a lot of respect for. And I think he had a lot of respect for me. And we were talking about, how do you change the police department? How do you change the consciousness of the police department so that they can use fewer guns and use a lot more connection, compassion, empathy, etc., to actually solve the problems of the society? So he and I, we were spinning this notion out, and he wanted me to introduce it to the police chief, but he did not want to like ram it down her throat. Okay, he wanted her to accept this notion. So he set up a meeting, her usual weekly meeting with the mayor, and told her that there's this guy, Shariff Abdullah. I want you to meet him, and he has some interesting things to say. And so we sat down, and I found it interesting that she brought with her to the meeting 4 Black commanders. Okay, four commanders who happen to be Black. So I'm talking for about 15 minutes, and she's got this kind of pleasant look on her face. She's not taking any notes. She's looking at me, no expression other than a pleasant expression. And I'm talking about, how do you fundamentally change a police department, and how do you get away from the violence culture and the violence consciousness to other ways of shaping behavior, changing behavior? So I go, yap for 15 minutes. And I wind down and say, well, do you have any questions or comments? And she says, no, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. And that was the end of it. I got a note from her about 2 or 3 weeks later. Thank you for our meeting. It was very informative. Go drop dead or whatever.
Right.
And now, the entire 15 minutes, she's waiting for me to say something Black. Okay. She's waiting for me to talk about police brutality. And then she'd have one of her commanders talk about, well, the incident of police brutality, blah, blah, blah. Or she's waiting for me to talk about homelessness, or she's waiting for me to talk about hiring in the police department, hiring Blacks in the police department. She couldn't hear me. She couldn't hear what I was saying. And that is something that happens a lot. Okay. And so one of my jobs is to try to get people to hear past their cultural limits, to hear past their what they're expecting to hear. Someone said that what you can see and what you can hear is based only on two things. It's not based on your eyes. It's based on what you have, what you expect to see, and what you've been trained to see. And they said, and nothing else. The first time I met Malidoma Some was at one of his meetings, one of his trainings. And there's like 300 people in the room, and he's walking back and forth. And every time he'd walk in my direction, he'd look at me, and then he'd look about, I'd say 7 or 8 feet above my head and back at me. And then he kind of keep walking on, and he'd come back and he'd look over my head, and I'm thinking this is pretty weird, you know. And at the end, I went over to shake his hand, and he said, can you see all those beings above your head? I'm like, huh? And he said, there's a crowd of beings floating above your head. I'm like, okay. So now, being from West Africa and being raised as a shaman, he had a full expectation of being able to see other beings that are invisible to others. And being raised in Camden, New Jersey, I had no expectation at all. Okay, so it's an interesting challenge. How do you go beyond your own limits? And how do you go beyond your own limits to see? How do you go beyond your own limits to hear? How do you go beyond your own limits, especially when those limits are not spiritual limits, but cultural limits? You know, it really is a challenge, and all of us have to face that challenge, not just the people that you think are in the out crowd.
So you sort of alluded to this without specifically stating it, but at some point, the sort of the spiritual piece came in, and I don't know enough about your background to say this, but I'll just ask the question. So I guess the larger question is, when did the idea that all that you're talking about is not just sort of the mechanical sort of transactional aspect of, let's say, fixing poverty or homelessness, but there is sort of a larger framework in which you could say that it's a holistic, you could even use the word spiritual viewpoint. And I'm wondering if some of your experience in Sri Lanka, which you probably have to tell the audience about, had anything to do with that at all.
Sri Lanka has a lot to do with it, but I think I need to start us way back. Okay. Raised as a Christian and raised as an Episcopalian. I think Episcopalian mainly because that was the closest church to where we were living at the time.
Right.
And church was something, you dress up on Sunday, you go to church, and you come back home and you've done your duty for the week, but I was really, really into it. I mean, I even at 8 or 9 years old, I was an acolyte in the church. I actually thought about joining the church, becoming a priest. When in the service where the transformation of the bread and the wine takes the place of the body and blood of Christ. This is something that was meaningful to me in ways I couldn't explain. And then after that, the priest started acting like regular old people, you know. There was an associate priest at the church who, when I was asking him about, you know, what's all this stuff happening in the streets? What is, you know, like, wouldn't Jesus want us? The church had these gold goblets and gold candlesticks, etc. I said, wouldn't Jesus want us to sell all that stuff, drink the host out of Dixie cups, and use the money to house people? And his response was, there, you're really young. You don't really understand these things. You'll understand this when you get older. And I'm happy to say I've never gotten older because I still don't understand it. So when I left the church, I left because its social message did not comport with the spiritual message of Jesus. And searched around for a while, flirted with Buddhism, and became a Muslim for reasons I can explain to you, but I'm not going to explain now because I need to get you to Sri Lanka. And so for 15 years, I did the 5 prayers a day. Well, I'm fasting for Ramadan right now. But was also uneasy with what I was seeing with Islam, that there's a disconnect between what the Quran says and what these people who call themselves Muslims are doing. So, you know, you get on the carpet, you're praying with these other fellow Muslims, and then you go to another mosque and you stick a bomb over in it and you blow them up. You should blow them up, but keep these. So I had an epiphanal moment. I was making the prayers with a group that I didn't know at all. I just went to the mosque, and the guy who was and one of the things you do is you line up in rows. So you bow and then you stand and then you bow and then you kneel. The guy right in front of me was wearing a t-shirt, and the t-shirt said, "Kill them all and let God sort it out." And so I would bow and come back to this message and bow. And I realized I shouldn't even be in the same room with this person. I should not be praying with someone who believes that enough to put it on a t-shirt. And this is the place where I realized that all religions had benefit. All religions had a share of the truth. And all religions had the people who are willing to twist that for their own benefits. So the problem isn't Christianity. The problem isn't Islam or Buddhism or Hinduism or anything like that. The problem is the people who have in their hearts the stuff that's missing that you should have in the heart that would carry you forward. And so one of my most profound experiences of that was early on in my time in Sri Lanka. I went to Sri Lanka at the invitation of the guy who's called the Gandhi of Sri Lanka, Dr. A.T. Aryaratne. And it's really interesting working with a Gandhi-like figure. And at one point I was going there's an old caretaker who took care of part of the Sarvodia complex, and she invited me to go up the hill to her temple to pray. And I always go where somebody's asking me to pray, so I went up. And as she went, and as we walked up, it was this beautiful night, really hot, humid. Stars were out, and we're walking, and the fireflies were out. So we're walking up this hill, and you could hear the monks up the hill. They're starting their chanting, and she's saying in her broken English, like, "What are you? Are you Christian? Are you Muslim? Are you Buddhist? I mean, what are you?" And I was having trouble answering the question. I was saying, I practice the truth of all of these things. And as I'm saying that, she just nods. She says, "Okay, all same thing," and just keeps walking up the hill. And this is my I've stuck with that for the longest time. It is all the same thing, and I applaud people who wish to go into a particular aspect of the same thing, but it's not to the exclusion of all of the other things, because if we do that, we're opening ourselves to someone rejecting ours, or denigrating ours. And we're not getting the essence of what we say we were getting. And so that's what I've been about. And one of the manuscripts I've got that I haven't done any writing on for a few years, the working title is called The Common Faith. What is it that we hold in common with each other? And when we start looking for that, we're going to see a lot more commonalities than we are going to see differences. And the question then is, who doesn't want us to see that? Who doesn't want us to find that we have a lot in common with Russian Orthodox churches, or with, Jain temples, or whatever? Anyway, so that's how I got to this place where I'm honoring all paths. I've read every holy book that I can get my hands on. I've read most of them several times, and I've read across them. Most people who read, if you're like a Christian and you're reading the Quran, you're just looking for information, looking for ammunition. You're looking for something that's going to refute all this to get people over into your group. And I'm not doing that. I don't have a group. And so by reading across them, you get to see this essence of truth that's in each one of them. And you also get to see there's static in them. Okay. I'm not going to say it's wrong or bad. It's just like getting a radio signal where there's some static. You're not able to hear it really clearly. I got that way reading through the begats in the Bible. It's like so-and-so begat so-and-so, and they live for so, and then so-and-so begat so-and-so. And I'm like, I really don't care. Hard enough for me to keep up with my own lineage. Anyway, so it's when you read across them, you pick up an awful lot more, and you start to see where these things are going, and you can start seeing how going back to our roots, to all of our roots, can get us into a place where I think we actually need to be in our society.
Well, you started when we talked earlier in the conversation, you were talking about your experience in Camden. And then you were talking about some of the people that have no idea what's happening in Camden. In other words, sort of like people use the word spiritual bypass, right? So, I guess what I'm trying to get to, and what we're going to be talking about in this symposium, is the connection between those two things, the connection between the social justice thing and the spirituality piece. Maybe you can talk about that just a little bit. Some
Yeah.
people see them totally separate.
Again, this has to do with what you can see, and also has to do with what you're willing to see. I was in a group, a spiritual group in down in California. A couple hundred people in this gathering, and they had just finished singing these wonderful songs and swaying and holding hands, and just we're all groovy here. And we were walking from the building we were in into the cafeteria to eat our meal. And there were several of the wait staff in with their hands held up, and saying, "We're not ready for you yet. Can you? We need another 5 minutes, and then the room will be ready for you." So they're saying that in English. And one of the people who was singing with the group just a few minutes earlier was walking up, and he was talking to someone, and he knocks this guy down to the ground. I mean, like bumps into him hard enough to knock him to the ground, and kept walking. He did not see this guy standing up with his hands out saying, "Please wait." Okay. And he didn't see it because it's not part of his reality. His reality was all the people behind him singing Kumbaya, and that disconnect. That's it. Not only, I mean, I've knocked people down before, but you stop, you help them up. Are you okay, etc. This is where I developed my theory about treating people like furniture. What you do with furniture is, when it's time for you to use it, you use it, and then when it's not time for you to use it, you get up and forget it. You forget that it's there. It doesn't matter to you that it's there. I was in another spiritual group, and this is at a person's house, a wealthy woman. And I said, when we do this, I want everyone to be present for this presentation I was making. And she said, "Well, we're all here, we're all ready." And I said, "Well, no, we're not. You have a maid, and she ain't here." "Oh, she's not interested in this kind of stuff." Ha ha ha. I said, "Why don't you call her in and find out if she's interested?" And then the next thing that came up was, "Well, who's going to pay for her time?" It's like, who's paying for your time? The same person paying for your time will pay for her time. And come to find out, the maid, as much as she possibly could, had been listening in on conversations about spirituality. The maid was actually borrowing her books, taking a book off the shelf, taking it home and reading it and putting it back on the shelf. And she had a world of real treasure to commit to the group. And the woman who was organizing all this never would have known what value she had in her own space, because there's the disconnect between these are spiritual people over here, and this is my maid over here. Okay.
It's interesting when you talk about the origins of all these religions, they didn't do that. I mean, you were just talking about your conversation with these Christians or whatever. It wasn't like they would just look the other way. That was part of the whole thing. That was part of the whole ethos.
That's right. That was it.
That was it. That's what we're doing. Yeah. That is a religion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Buddhism, same thing.
And
it's only in modern times where this like schism.
Yeah. Jesus didn't eat with the outcasts of the society just because he felt like it. I mean, it wasn't oh well, there's a tax collector over there, he looks hungry. It's like, no, we're going to do this to show that all of us are worthy, and all of us, and this is the practice of inclusivity, is we are one. We're one with all of these people who would oppress us. Okay. And by being one with them, we can end the oppression. So what we do, though, what we have done is take this, the philosophy of Jesus, and scrape it all away. So all you left is this image of this guy, not even the image of the guy, image of some white guy, a 6 foot tall white guy in Palestine who would stand out like a sore thumb. And that becomes this image of Jesus that we then don't have to worry about what he was teaching or what he was doing. He can do anything he wants to do. And no, he can do, like a puppet, anything we want him to do. So when the Gulf War started, first Gulf War started, I was talking with a Christian minister, and he's wearing black, and he's got this huge cross that he's wearing. And he was advocating for the war. And I was saying, there are other ways of handling this besides killing people. And he's like, oh no, you got to go in and kill them every once in a while. That you got to clean house, etc. And I said, I think we have to love our enemies. And he said, oh, I don't believe that. I mean, I think that and after you make them submit, then you can do that. And I pointed to his crucifix, and I said, isn't that what Jesus said? And he thought for a second. He says, well, yeah, but I pray to Jesus, I believe in Jesus, but I don't follow him. And I'm like, tell me where the difference is here. Tell me where where do you get off here? And unfortunately, his philosophy, as long as you pray, and as long as you carry a crucifix, and as long as you go to church on Sunday, you can do whatever the hell you want any other day of the week. Okay.
That is the young man you saw at the mosque with the t-shirt.
It's all the same. They would understand each other very, very well. Okay. And so you wind up with this shallow, hollow Christianity or Islam or Buddhism or whatever. And the people who are looking for depth, the people who really have soul questions, they don't get their questions answered. They don't get to they don't get the understanding of the Jesuses and the Muhammads and the Buddhas, etc. When you've got all these other people who claim to be that, and yet they putting each other down, putting bombs on each other's buses, keep on that it's okay for you to do these things and okay to say these things, and not just looking at it from a personal view, but looking at it from the number of people who call themselves Christians, but they're really praying to money. That money is their sacrament, okay, or power is their sacrament, or looking good in a particular group of people is their sacrament. And it's like we need to look at this from a different point of view. And I think we can. I mean, this is the place where I talk about consciousness, that what it's all about is consciousness. Now, I happen to follow Jesus and follow Muhammad, and following Muhammad is I read and follow the Quran, which is what he brought, and I get into interesting conversations with Muslims around the difference. But I read and follow the Buddha. I mean, it's like, how do I practice these things? So I wrote a book, which happens to be at my elbow here, called Practicing Wisdom. And in the book is every wisdom teacher I can fit in these pages. And the thing I'm interested in is not talking about wisdom. The name of the book is not Talking Wisdom, it's Practicing Wisdom. So how can I, in my daily life, take the things that our wisdom teachers have taught and apply it to how I live my daily life? I am not always successful at that. But I've always tried to make a sincere attempt at that. And when my failure or my disagreement becomes evident, I have to work it. I have to work on it. And sometimes it really is just a disagreement. I shouldn't say just, it can be a profound disagreement. I have a friend, I'm not going to call her name, who is a priest, a minister with the Unity Church. And she has taken me to task more than once, in a very loving way, more than once, around the fact that I am not a vegetarian. I'm pretty vegetarian. I don't eat red meat. Try not to eat chicken. I will eat all the fish I can get my hands on. I just heard that there's a YouTube video on the 7 fish you should avoid eating, and there's some fish I've never eaten it, and after I saw that, I'll never will eat it. Orange roughy. I don't know if you've heard of it or not, but the fish lives hundreds of years old. A fish can be, you could catch a fish, an orange roughy, that gets 150 years old, and I don't want to eat anything that old. This in a fish,
Shariff, one of the things you're going to be doing.
Sorry, let me interrupt you, because I want to finish the thought with the minister. So she was saying, if you really believe in inclusivity, like you say, you would not eat a living sensate being. There's an awful lot of teaching that supports her point of view. So this is not like a frivolous, like, I don't believe that or whatever. I happen to believe something different. and we are going to disagree with each other around that point. That doesn't make me right. It doesn't make her wrong. If somebody says, because of my interpretation of inclusivity, I'm going to not eat meat. I'm not going to eat fish. I'm not going to eat chicken. I'm not going to eat anything. And she said, anything that has arms and legs and eyes. I respect that, and that's not my path. But we can do an awful lot of stuff together before we get to the point of, okay, I've got to get out the boat because you're not eating meat, or I've got to get out the boat because you are eating.
So I wanted to segue to inclusion, which is one of the things you're going to be talking about, and you have like a 3-hour practicum, I believe, subsequent to our event. What do you expect people to get out of that? What is inclusion? What are people going to learn if they participate in it?
Well, first of all, there's several different things that get mentioned in this umbrella of coming together. What I talk about is inclusivity, and I've given inclusivity a very specific meaning in one of my books. For me, and for a lot of people, inclusion means taking these people who have been outside of our society and bringing them in.
Right.
And this is what we were doing in the 60s, where you look at people who have been historically excluded from society, and that includes lots and lots of people. Who's a majority of humanity excluded from their own society. And what can we do to bring them into the center of the society? I go further than that with inclusivity. Inclusivity means we are one, and I have to treat you the way that I myself would want to be treated. Even more than that, I have to work with you to create a society where the practice of inclusivity does not stop with our humanity. That all of us, all living beings on the planet, have rights with regard to each other, and also have duties with regard to each other, have responsibilities with regard to each other. I remember as a kid, just stepping on ant mounds just to watch them scatter. How many of us did not get the magnifying glass on a sunny day and start zapping ants? Why would I do that? Why would we do that? So our challenge in terms of the practice of inclusivity is treating each other as one, developing a society where all of us are one. That doesn't mean that some may have more and some may have less. It doesn't mean that everybody has to have everything equally, but it does mean that everyone should be able to say, I've got enough, and that I'm okay. Now, I can get not okay when I see that I'm driving around in my Toyota and you're driving around in your Maserati. I want a Maserati now. So I don't, by the way. But am I okay with my Toyota? Yeah, I'm okay. I really am. And so I don't have to have, the most expensive meal in the world. But I do have to make sure I know how much is okay. How much is enough for me? How much is enough for us? And then when you get to the levels of the Bezoses and the Musks, etc., to know how much is too much. My mother taught me this, being raised in Camden, raised on welfare. There's this zone called enough. And if you don't have enough to reach enough, if you lack resources, if you're down here, you're going to make bad decisions. Similarly, if this is enough and you've got way, way more than you could ever use in 20 lifetimes, you make bad decisions also. And so how do we get to the point where adding more money to my bank account does not satisfy me, does not satisfy this thing that's in your heart? And recognize that what's in your heart is much more important than what's in your bank account. And once you get there, we can all relax. And we can support each other in some really interesting ways. And we can come together and we can work together in some really interesting ways that don't look anything like capitalism and nothing like socialism and nothing like communism. It's going to be whole new patterns of living. And I think that's going to be a good idea. So we'll look at some of that in this session that's coming up, and we'll look at what does the practice of inclusivity actually mean, and how do you practice inclusivity with people that you fundamentally disagree with, or you think you fundamentally disagree with. If I can share a story that happened couple of decades ago. I was working with a group of blue-collar road workers. These are the bluest of the blue collars. These are the asphalt spreaders, the sewer cleaners, etc. And I was talking to them about inclusivity. And most of them were buying it, but some of them were not. And in the middle of my talk, this guy says, I mean, my mouth is moving, I'm talking. This guy says, the white man is an endangered species. And I said something to like kind of humor him and like, okay, I'm going to keep talking now. So I go on a little further, and in a few minutes, he blurts out something else like this. And I kind of like, okay, I'm going to keep going here. And then he said, you're not listening to me. And I stopped and I said, you are right. I am not listening to you. And I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to call a break here, and I'm going to center myself during this break. And we come back, I'm going to listen to you. And when we came back, what he said was really profound. He said, I can't get interested or upset about whether or not a Black person has one of their rights violated when the same thing is happening to me. He said, my butt is on the line. And you're asking me to forget about my butt and look at the butt of this guy over here and help him when there's nobody over here helping me. Same conditions, just a different color of skin. And this color of skin gets you attention, and his color of skin gets him locked in jail. And when he finished, I said, you are absolutely right. It should not matter in society if it's a Black person, a white person, a woman, a foreigner, anybody who is having an experience should be able to connect with others and have everyone interested in their welfare and concern. And that means that I have to be interested in your welfare, whether I like you or not. It doesn't matter whether I like you. It doesn't matter whether people do seminars around you. What matters is that regardless of whether or not I like you, you are my brother, you are my ward, you are my friend, you are my you are the person I have to reach down and help. And I meant that then, I mean it now, and this is how I spend my time and live my life, and wind up working with some very, very interesting people. People who, after we're working together, it's like, okay, goodbye. We're not going to hang out. We're not going to go to dinner together. We're not going to, I do this kind of work not for you. I do this kind of work because all of these wisdom teachers that are standing behind me looking at me are demanding that I do this kind of work. And if I don't do this work, I'm just like everybody else that says, oh, I'll help them, but I'm not going to help them. And that exacerbates all of our social ills. I mean, it makes everything that much worse. And I'm not interested in making things worse. So yeah, that's how you activate your philosophy. Yeah, philosophy is just going blah 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 blah. Activating your philosophy, you wind up doing something completely different.
All right. Well, I think for now we can leave it there, other than to say that we're having this thing that for Shariff is going to be a part of on April 16th on a Sunday. And we'll be talking about inclusion, and hopefully you won't leave it after like some people leave their Sunday sermon and just go about their business. Hopefully it's something that can transform you and we can all put into practice for the purpose of making it a better world.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Yeah.
Yeah, me too.